There is a strange advantage possessed by the person who can remain calm when everyone else has begun to lose himself in emotion. When fear enters a room, people rarely ask what is true. They ask what everyone else is doing. When anger rises, they mistake intensity for strength. When uncertainty appears, they rush toward the nearest opinion, the nearest distraction, the nearest escape. And yet the person who can pause, think clearly, and continue with what must be done possesses something far more valuable than enthusiasm. He possesses command of himself. The world will continually offer you reasons to become distracted. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will criticize you. Someone will succeed before you. Someone will fail you. A plan will collapse at the very moment you had begun to trust it. Your emotions will tell you that you must react immediately, defend yourself immediately, prove yourself immediately. But not every feeling deserves an action, and not every thought deserves your obedience. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not shout when challenged or become desperate when ignored. It simply keeps its attention upon the thing that matters. While others spend their strength reacting to every disturbance, the focused person quietly gathers his strength by refusing to be moved by every disturbance. This is one of the great disciplines of life, learning that your attention is not something the world is entitled to possess. You may feel anger without becoming angry in your actions. You may feel fear without allowing fear to choose your direction. You may experience disappointment without turning disappointment into an identity. The emotion can be present without becoming the master, and this is where your advantage begins. Not because you never become emotional, but because you learn to remain faithful to what matters even when you do. For the person who can keep thinking while others are reacting, keep working while others are complaining, and keep moving while others are consumed by temporary feelings, time itself begins to work in his favor. There are moments in life when the greatest danger is not the difficulty itself, but the way we see that difficulty while we are afraid, angry, disappointed, or desperate. Emotion has a peculiar power over the mind. It does not always lie to us, but it can make one small truth appear to be the whole truth. A temporary failure can suddenly look like a permanent defeat. One person's rejection can feel like proof that nobody will ever value you. A difficult season can persuade you that your entire life has become difficult. The emotion does not necessarily create the circumstance, but it can distort the size and meaning of the circumstance until you can no longer see clearly. This is why focus becomes so valuable when emotions become loud. Focus does not mean becoming cold or pretending that you feel nothing. It means refusing to let a passing feeling become the judge of your entire life. You may be disappointed and still think wisely. You may be angry and still choose your words carefully. You may be afraid and still take the next necessary step. The mature mind does not demand the absence of emotion before it acts. It learns to act rightly while emotion is present. Consider how easily fear changes ordinary decisions. A person who is calm may look at a problem and ask, "What can be done?" But the frightened mind asks, "What if everything goes wrong?" The first question searches for a path, the second often builds a prison. Both may arise from the same circumstance, yet they lead the mind in completely different directions. Fear makes possibilities feel like certainties. It takes what might happen and whispers that it will happen. Then the person begins responding to an imagined future as though it were already standing before him. Anger has another kind of distortion. It narrows the mind until the offense becomes larger than everything surrounding it. You forget what has been good, because you are occupied with what has been wrong. You remember the sentence that wounded you and forget the 100 sentences that did not. You begin preparing your response before you have even understood the situation. In such moments, reaction feels like strength because it is immediate. But immediacy is not the same thing as wisdom. The focused person learns to create a small space between what happens and what he does about it. That space may be only a moment, but it can change the whole direction of a life. In that space, he can ask whether the problem truly deserves his attention. He can distinguish between what is painful and what is important. He can separate another person's behavior from his own character. He can recognize that not every insult requires an answer, and not every setback requires a change of direction. This becomes especially important when everyone around you is emotional. Human beings are strangely inclined to borrow one another's fears. If one person begins to panic, another becomes anxious. If a crowd becomes angry, individuals who were calm moments before may suddenly become angry themselves. We often mistake the emotional temperature of the room for the truth about the situation. But the truth does not become more true because everyone is shouting about it. A crisis does not become easier because you panic alongside it. And a problem does not become smaller because you refuse to look at it. What changes is your ability to deal with it. Your greatest advantage, therefore, is not that you will never feel deeply. It is that your feelings will not automatically receive authority over your decisions. You can listen to emotion without surrendering to it. You can acknowledge pain without worshipping it. You can recognize fear without allowing fear to write the story of your future. There is a quiet strength in being able to say, I feel this, but I will still consider what is true. I feel this, but I will still do what is necessary. I feel this, but I will not allow this moment to decide who I become. The world will always contain enough noise to disturb an undisciplined mind. There will always be someone offended, someone frightened, someone jealous, someone impatient, someone convinced that immediate reaction is the only possible response. If you allow every emotional wave around you to determine your direction, you will spend your life moving without truly going anywhere. Focus asks something more difficult. It asks you to remain present when your mind wants to escape, remain thoughtful when your emotions demand reaction, and remain faithful to what matters when the world around you becomes uncertain. It asks you to remember that a feeling may be powerful without being permanent, and that a moment may be painful without being decisive, and perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of self-command, learning to see the situation as it is rather than as your emotion insists that it is, learning to hold your attention steady long enough for fear to become smaller, anger to become quieter, disappointment to become clearer, and the truth to become visible again. There is a difference between having a reaction and choosing a response, and much of the direction of a person's life may depend upon whether he has learned that difference. The first is almost automatic. Something happens, a word is spoken, a door closes, a plan fails, and the mind immediately produces anger, fear, disappointment, or resentment. The second requires something more difficult. It requires a pause. It requires enough discipline to ask whether the feeling that has appeared deserves to determine what happens next. A person who has no control over his reactions is easily directed by the world around him. Praise can make him arrogant. Criticism can make him bitter. Rejection can make him desperate. Success can make him careless. Failure can make him surrender. He may believe that he is making his own decisions, while in reality his direction is being chosen by whatever happens to him. The circumstance presses a button and he moves. This is a dangerous way to live because circumstances are rarely under our command. People will disappoint you. Plans will change. Opportunities will disappear. Someone will speak unfairly about you. Someone else will receive the recognition you wanted. There will be days when your effort seems to produce nothing. If your direction depends upon everything going according to your wishes, then your direction will constantly be changing. The disciplined person learns another way. He does not demand that life become predictable before he becomes steady. He understands that control over himself is more valuable than control over circumstances. He cannot decide what another person will say, but he can decide whether he will answer with bitterness. He cannot prevent disappointment, but he can decide whether disappointment will become an excuse for abandoning his purpose. He cannot command the future, but he can command what he does with this particular day. This does not mean that he becomes emotionless. In fact, genuine self-control requires honesty about emotion. A person cannot master what he refuses to acknowledge. If you are angry, admit that you are angry. If you are afraid, recognize the fear. If you are hurt, do not pretend that you are made of stone. But after recognizing the emotion, you must still ask a more important question: what should I do now? That question separates maturity from impulse. Impulse says, I feel it, therefore I must act on it. Wisdom says, I feel it, therefore I should examine it. There are feelings that deserve attention but not obedience. There are thoughts that deserve consideration but not belief. There are moments when silence is wiser than explanation and patience is stronger than retaliation. Think of how many unnecessary problems are created because people respond while they are emotionally charged. A sentence spoken in anger can damage a relationship that took years to build. A decision made from fear can close a door that patience might have opened. A careless reaction to criticism can reveal insecurity that the criticism itself never exposed. The original problem may have been small, but the uncontrolled reaction gives it a life of its own. This is why the ability to control your reactions becomes a form of freedom. When you no longer need to answer every insult, defend every misunderstanding, or prove yourself in every disagreement, you recover enormous amounts of energy. Your attention becomes available for things that actually deserve it. There is also something deeply powerful about a person who cannot easily be provoked. Not because he is weak or passive, but because he is no longer easily manipulated. If another person's anger can determine your anger, they have influence over you. If another person's panic can determine your decisions, their panic has become your master. If someone's opinion can completely change your confidence, then your confidence was never resting upon anything stable. Self-command changes this. You begin to understand that you do not have to attend every battle to which you are invited. You do not have to answer every accusation. You do not have to explain every choice. You do not have to turn every disagreement into a contest of pride. And gradually, your life becomes less reactive and more deliberate. You begin choosing your direction before the noise of the world chooses it for you. You become slower to speak when anger rises, slower to surrender when fear appears, slower to celebrate when pride takes hold, and quicker to return your attention to what matters. The person who can govern himself possesses an advantage that circumstances cannot easily take away. His progress no longer depends entirely upon whether the day is pleasant. His discipline does not disappear when somebody misunderstands him. His purpose does not collapse because somebody refuses to encourage him. He learns to keep walking even when his emotions are asking him to stop. And perhaps this is one of the quietest forms of strength. Not the ability to control everything around you, but the ability to remain responsible for what happens within you. For when you control your reactions, you protect your attention. When you protect your attention, you protect your choices. And when you protect your choices, you begin to protect the direction of your entire life from the temporary storms that pass through it. There is a peculiar weakness in human beings. We often mistake another person's fear for evidence that we ourselves should be afraid. One person begins to panic, another becomes restless, and soon an entire room can be filled with an anxiety that nobody can properly explain. It is as though emotion travels faster than reason. We see someone losing control and, without examining the situation ourselves, begin to surrender our own peace to their reaction. This happens in ordinary life more often than we notice. Someone tells you that everything is going wrong, and suddenly your own mind begins searching for everything that could possibly go wrong. Someone complains about the future, and you begin doubting your plans. Someone becomes angry with you, and you feel compelled to defend yourself before you have even considered whether a defense is necessary. Someone else is rushing, and you begin believing that you must rush too. But another person's urgency does not automatically become your responsibility. There will always be people who are uncomfortable with your calmness because your calmness reminds them that panic is not the only possible response. When everyone is reacting, the person who stops to think may appear strangely slow. Yet there are moments when slowness is not weakness but wisdom. A person who refuses to move simply because everyone else is moving may see what the crowd cannot see. You must learn to distinguish between compassion and emotional imitation. You can care about someone who is afraid without becoming ruled by their fear. You can listen to someone who is angry without becoming angry yourself. You can understand another person's disappointment without allowing their disappointment to become the explanation for your own life. This requires a certain inner separation, not coldness, but clarity. You must be able to say in effect, that is what they are feeling. Now what is true for me? The question is important because people often hand their emotional burdens to others without realizing it. They speak from fear and expect you to make decisions from fear. They speak from bitterness and invite you to join them in bitterness. They have lost confidence and, sometimes without intending to, attempt to make you lose yours as well. If you are not careful, you will begin carrying emotions that were never yours to carry. Consider how easily this happens with criticism. Someone may dislike your decision and express that dislike with great confidence. Because they speak strongly, you may assume they must be right. But confidence is not proof, and volume is not wisdom. A person can be completely certain and completely mistaken. Your responsibility is not to match their certainty, but to examine the truth. The same is true when people around you become discouraged. Discouragement can become contagious because it offers an easy explanation for failure. There is no point. Once that sentence enters the mind, effort begins to look foolish. But the fact that someone else has stopped believing does not mean that the thing is impossible. Their exhaustion may be real, but it is not necessarily a prophecy about your future. You must therefore become careful about what you permit into your mind. This does not mean avoiding difficult people or pretending that problems do not exist. It means refusing to let someone else's emotional condition become the ruler of your own judgment. You can hear the warning without inheriting the panic. You can consider the criticism without accepting the bitterness. You can acknowledge the danger without becoming paralyzed by it. There is great freedom in learning this distinction. You stop feeling responsible for regulating every person's feelings. You stop believing that you must rescue everyone from discomfort. You stop allowing someone else's disappointment to make you abandon your own responsibility. And you begin to understand that sometimes the most helpful thing you can bring into an emotional situation is not another emotional reaction, but a clear mind. When everyone else is speaking from fear, clarity becomes valuable. When everyone else is reacting, patience becomes valuable. When everyone else is looking for someone to blame, responsibility becomes valuable. The person who can remain steady does not necessarily have all the answers, but he has something essential: the ability to keep searching for the right answer, without being carried away by the emotional current around him. Your peace must not depend upon the emotional weather of other people. If it does, then anyone can disturb you merely by changing their mood. Anyone can make you doubt yourself by expressing doubt. Anyone can make you angry by becoming angry. Anyone can interrupt your purpose simply by creating enough noise. But when you learn to stand apart from the panic, without becoming indifferent to the people experiencing it, something changes. You can become the calm presence in the room. You can think when others cannot. You can listen without absorbing everything. You can act when action is necessary and remain still when action would only create more confusion. And perhaps this is one of the clearest signs that a person is becoming stronger. He no longer needs the emotional condition of the crowd to tell him how he should feel, what he should believe, or where he should go, because he has learned to examine the situation with his own mind and to remain faithful to what is true even when everyone around him is being carried away by fear, anger, disappointment, or there is a temptation in every human being to answer everything that touches his pride, his comfort, or his sense of importance. Someone speaks against you, and you want to answer. Someone ignores you, and you want to demand an explanation. Someone succeeds where you expected to succeed, and you feel the need to prove that you are capable too. Something goes wrong, and immediately the mind begins searching for someone to blame. The impulse to react can become so familiar that we mistake it for responsibility, but focus demands a sacrifice that many people are unwilling to make: the sacrifice of immediate reaction. You cannot give your attention to everything and still expect to give your best attention to anything. Every unnecessary argument, every meaningless comparison, every emotional disturbance, and every desire to prove yourself takes something from the work that actually matters. This is why a focused person often appears quieter than the people around him. He is not necessarily unaware of what is happening. He simply understands that awareness does not require participation. You can notice an insult without answering it. You can recognize criticism without defending yourself immediately. You can see another person's success without turning it into a judgment against your own progress. You can hear the noise without allowing the noise to become your direction. There is a strange cost to constantly reacting. Each reaction may seem small, but small distractions repeated throughout the day become a life divided into fragments. You begin one task, then check what someone said. You return to your work, then wonder what another person thinks. You make progress, then compare yourself with someone else. You regain your concentration, then become angry over something that happened hours ago. The body may remain in one place while the mind is continually running from one disturbance to another, and then you wonder why you cannot focus. The problem is not always a lack of ability. Sometimes it is an unwillingness to leave certain things unanswered. You want every misunderstanding corrected. You want every critic convinced. You want every person who underestimated you to eventually admit that they were wrong. You want to know what everyone thinks. But the desire to control every opinion is one of the quickest ways to lose control of your own attention. There will always be people who misunderstand you. There will always be situations that do not receive the explanation you believe they deserve. There will always be moments when silence feels uncomfortable, because you know you could say something. Yet silence can sometimes be the price of keeping your mind clear enough to continue building what matters. This does not mean that every problem should be ignored. There are times when you must speak, confront, correct, or act. Focus is not cowardice disguised as peace. It is the ability to decide what deserves your response and what does not. The mature person does not avoid every difficult conversation. He simply refuses to spend the same amount of energy on everything that demands his attention. Think about how much strength is wasted trying to win battles that produce nothing. A person argues with someone online for an hour and walks away with no greater wisdom, no improved character, and no meaningful progress. Another spends an entire evening thinking about a careless remark made by someone who has already forgotten it. Another abandons his work because he becomes consumed with proving that somebody else is wrong. The tragedy is that the distraction often feels important while it is happening. Focus asks you to look beyond that feeling. It asks, will this matter tomorrow? Will this improve my character? Will this move me toward the responsibility I have chosen? If the answer is no, then perhaps the strongest response is not a better argument, but a return to your work. Your attention is one of the few possessions you can spend only once. When you give it to resentment, you cannot give that same moment to growth. When you give it to comparison, you cannot give it fully to your own development. When you give it to unnecessary reaction, you cannot use it to build the future you claim to want. This is why focused people sometimes disappoint those who expect constant reactions from them. They do not always explain themselves. They do not always respond to provocation. They do not always announce what they are planning. They understand that not every silence is weakness, and not every response is strength. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is return to the work. Let someone misunderstand you while you improve. Let someone doubt you while you continue. Let someone criticize you while you examine yourself honestly and correct what genuinely needs correction. Let the world make its noise without demanding that you join it. There is no law saying that every voice must receive an answer from you. When you stop reacting to everything, you discover how much energy was being consumed by things that were never part of your real purpose. The mind becomes quieter. Decisions become clearer. Work becomes deeper. You begin to notice that many disturbances lose their power when they are denied your immediate attention. And perhaps this is the difficult lesson focus teaches. You cannot become deeply committed to something while remaining deeply available to every distraction. At some point, you must decide that your purpose is more important than your impulse to respond, that your future is more valuable than your need to be understood, and that the work you are building deserves more of your attention than the people and circumstances that merely want to interrupt it. There are moments when the world seems to demand an immediate answer from you. Pressure rises, people begin speaking quickly, emotions become stronger, and suddenly there is an expectation that you must decide, explain, defend, or act. Yet some of the worst decisions a person makes are born from the belief that speed is always wisdom. There are circumstances in which the strongest response is not to speak more quickly, but to become quiet enough to think silence is often misunderstood. Some imagine that silence means weakness, uncertainty, or surrender. But there is a kind of silence that comes from strength. It is the silence of a person who does not need to prove that he is in control, because he is already trying to control himself. He does not allow the pressure of the moment to force words from him that he will later regret. He understands that once words are released, they cannot be gathered back simply because the emotion has passed. Patience works in much the same way. It does not mean doing nothing. It means refusing to allow urgency to become your master. A patient person can act quickly when action is necessary, but he does not confuse haste with courage. He knows that some decisions become clearer when the first wave of emotion has passed. Imagine a person standing in a storm. If he begins running in every direction because the wind is loud, he may exhaust himself without finding safety. But if he stops long enough to understand the direction of the storm, he may discover where he should actually go. The same principle applies to the mind. When pressure rises, the first impulse is often movement. Yet what the mind may need most is stillness. This is why calm people can become so valuable in difficult situations. They are not necessarily the most intelligent people in the room, nor do they always possess the perfect answer. But they are less likely to make the situation worse simply because everyone else is frightened. Their calmness creates room for thought. Their patience gives facts time to appear. Their silence prevents emotion from multiplying through unnecessary words. There is also something powerful about refusing to respond at the exact moment someone expects you to. If another person is angry and you immediately become angry, the disagreement becomes larger. If they raise their voice and you raise yours, neither person has gained control. But if you remain composed, you break the pattern. You do not reward anger with more anger. You do not allow someone else's emotional state to dictate your own. This does not mean allowing people to mistreat you. There are times when firm words are necessary. There are moments when silence would become avoidance rather than wisdom. But even then, the strongest words usually come from a mind that has first become clear. A controlled response can carry more authority than an emotional explosion because it is not merely releasing feeling. It is communicating intention. Pressure reveals habits. When everything is easy, almost anyone can appear patient. When circumstances are comfortable, almost anyone can appear disciplined. But when the plan fails, when criticism arrives, when money is uncertain, when people disappoint you, when the future becomes unclear, then the question becomes different. Who are you when you cannot control what is happening? If your first instinct is panic, you will make decisions from panic. If your first instinct is anger, you will create consequences from anger. But if you have practiced patience during ordinary days, you have something to draw upon when extraordinary pressure arrives. Patience is therefore not merely a virtue for peaceful circumstances. It is preparation for difficult ones. You train yourself to pause before answering. You learn to sleep on important decisions when possible. You refuse to send the message while your anger is at its highest. You step away long enough to ask whether the problem will still deserve the same response tomorrow. These small acts may appear insignificant, but they gradually teach the mind that emotion can be experienced without immediate obedience. Silence can teach the same lesson. When you do not immediately explain yourself, you discover that you can survive being misunderstood. When you do not answer every criticism, you discover that your identity does not depend upon winning every argument. When you remain quiet long enough to observe, you often learn things that hurried speech would have hidden, and perhaps this is why pressure can become an unexpected teacher. It reveals whether you have built a mind that requires perfect conditions in order to remain steady. A strong mind does not need the storm to disappear before it can think. It learns to think inside the storm. It does not require everyone around it to become calm before it becomes calm itself. There will always be moments when your emotions tell you that you must act immediately. Sometimes they will be right about the urgency of the situation, but they will not always be right about the manner of your response. The disciplined person learns to separate those things. He can recognize that something matters without allowing panic to determine what he does about it. So when pressure rises, do not assume that you must become louder. Become clearer. Do not assume that you must react faster. Become more deliberate. Do not assume that silence means you have nothing to say. Sometimes silence means you are refusing to say what emotion is demanding and waiting until you can say what wisdom requires. And in that quiet space between pressure and response, you begin to discover a strength that cannot easily be shaken, because the world may control the circumstances around you for a moment, but it does not have to control the mind with which you meet those circumstances. There is a kind of advantage that cannot be measured by money, talent, intelligence, or opportunity. It belongs to the person who can remain steady when the people around him become distracted. When others become emotional, he does not immediately become emotional. When others lose patience, he does not surrender his patience. When others begin changing direction because of fear, criticism, comparison, or uncertainty, he remembers why he began moving in the first place. This kind of steadiness is easy to admire but difficult to practice. Anyone can remain focused when circumstances are comfortable. When the work is going well, people are encouraging you, and the future appears promising. Discipline feels almost natural. The real test arrives when the atmosphere changes, someone doubts you, a plan fails, progress becomes slower than expected, another person appears to move ahead of you. Suddenly the mind begins asking whether all your effort is worth it. This is where many people abandon the very thing they once believed mattered. They do not always quit because the goal became impossible. Sometimes they quit because their emotions became louder than their purpose. They allow one disappointing day to speak for an entire future. They allow another person's success to make their own progress look meaningless. They allow temporary uncertainty to convince them that they chose the wrong path. Their direction changes not because the truth changed, but because their emotional state changed. The steady person learns to recognize this difference. He understands that feelings are real but temporary. A difficult morning does not necessarily mean a difficult life. A failure does not necessarily mean a failed future. A season of slow progress does not necessarily mean that nothing is happening. The mind that remains steady learns to give circumstances enough time to reveal what they actually mean. This is one reason consistency is so powerful. Consistency does not require you to feel motivated every day. It requires you to remember what matters when motivation disappears. It means continuing to practice, learn, work, and improve even when there is no immediate reward for doing so. It means refusing to make permanent decisions based upon temporary emotions. The world is full of distractions that look urgent. Someone else is achieving something, so you feel behind. Someone criticizes your work, so you feel compelled to defend it. A new opportunity appears, so you wonder whether your current path is foolish. A setback occurs, and suddenly you are tempted to abandon everything and begin again. Sometimes changing direction is wise. But sometimes the desire to change direction is merely the desire to escape discomfort. A steady mind learns to ask the difference. It asks, am I changing because the path is genuinely wrong, or because the path has become difficult? That question can save years of unnecessary wandering. Difficulty is not always evidence that you are mistaken. Sometimes difficulty is simply the price of becoming capable of carrying something valuable. This does not mean that you should stubbornly continue everything you begin. Wisdom requires correction. There are times when a goal should be changed, a habit should be abandoned, or a direction should be reconsidered. But those decisions should come from honest reflection rather than emotional exhaustion. The difference matters when everyone else loses focus. The steady person becomes difficult to distract because he is not constantly searching for emotional confirmation. He does not need every day to feel meaningful before he continues. He does not require applause to know that disciplined work has value. He understands that much of what is worth building develops quietly, beneath the surface. Long before anyone else can see it, a tree does not become strong because someone stands beside it every morning and praises its growth. It becomes strong through patient development, through seasons that are visible and seasons that are not. Human beings are not so different. Some of the most important changes in a person's character happen when nobody is watching and nothing appears to be happening. This is why you must become careful about comparing your progress with the visible progress of others. You see their results but rarely see their private struggles. You see their confidence but not the doubts they have fought. You see the finished work but not the years of ordinary effort behind it. Comparison can make you abandon your own process simply because you are looking at another person's chapter and judging it against your unfinished one. Stay with what deserves your attention. If your work matters, return to it. If your character needs strengthening, work on it. If your goal is worthy, continue learning how to reach it. If you have made a mistake, correct it without turning the mistake into an identity. If someone misunderstands you, let your actions eventually speak where explanations cannot. The advantage of steadiness becomes greatest over time. The person who remains focused for one day has practiced discipline. The person who remains focused for years has built a different kind of life. Small acts of control accumulate. Small refusals to react accumulate. Small decisions to return to the work accumulate. Eventually, what once required great effort begins to become part of who you are. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning of staying steady. It is not simply refusing to move. It is refusing to let every emotional disturbance decide where you move next. You remain capable of changing, but you no longer change merely because you are uncomfortable. You remain sensitive, but you are no longer controlled by every feeling. You remain aware of the world, but you do not surrender your mind to the world's noise. When others lose focus, you do not need to become superior to them. You simply need to remain responsible for yourself. Let them rush if rushing is what they choose. Let them react if reaction is what they choose. Your task is quieter. Keep your mind clear. Keep your attention where it belongs. Keep correcting your course when truth requires it. Keep walking when temporary emotions tell you to stop. Because in a world where attention is constantly being pulled in 100 directions, the person who can remain present with what truly matters possesses something rarer, not a life without pressure, not a mind without emotion, and not a path without difficulty, but the ability to continue with purpose when the noise around him is asking him to become someone else.